Well, I'm going to turn it over to Christina and Becky, who are our presenters.
Hi, y'all. I can't see all your faces, so I don't know. If we bore you, I will have no idea of knowing. So it's okay to be on screen. We'd love to see you. I am Kristi Maulden. I am the Dean of the Cathedral of St. John in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I've been here going on 4 years. And prior to that, I was with Becky at Trinity Episcopal Church in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was with Becky that we created this church down under that we're going to be talking about tonight. And it was and still is, a major labor of love and time and commitment for the staff and congregation of Trinity. And we'll also talk a little bit about some of the elements that I brought to the cathedral, a totally different venue than Trinity Tulsa when it comes to working with children's ministry and liturgy. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I'll let Becky introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Becky. I am at Trinity Episcopal in Tulsa, and I've been here in June. It will be 19 years. I'm the director of Christian formation here. In the last few months, I've taken over that full role. I was primarily children and youth formation for the time that Kristi and I worked together, which was 13 years, I think. So we did a lot of collaborating. And yeah, like she talked about, we brought together this interactive family service that really started when her youngest child and my oldest child were about 2, and they were in
Disruptive.
they are active children who we have Trinity is a very traditional cathedral type space. So very high ceilings, lots of pews. You have that crucifix shape and lots of echoing of sound and that sort of thing. And I tended to sit near the back. And so a lot of what my kids could see was a pew. And so there was something really amazing that would happen when it was time for communion, where we noticed our kids wanted to really be a part of, they at a gut level knew that this was being part of this community, that was what it meant to belong. And so the crawling under the pews, the stacking of the kneelers and all the other stuff that goes on in the pew, like there was something very tangible about what they got out of communion. And so we decided we needed to build something around that.
It was an interesting exercise. We encouraged people to imagine what it would be like to be a small child and what could they actually see in the liturgy if they were, short. So you miss out on the incredible richness of the Episcopal liturgy because it's all about sights and smells and sounds and tangible things. So we wanted to not exclude kids from the liturgy, but to include them on every level. And of course, with any sort of change,
I'm turning this down.
We had some resistance, shall we say, to really altering one of the formal services. People weren't interested in adding things to our 9 o'clock liturgy or altering the interior furnishings. But we had this beautiful space underneath the sanctuary, the undercroft, and it was totally empty and unused at that point. So that's where the church down under comes from, because it was really the church down under. So we created a space downstairs that was church. we had an altar, altar and candles and rugs and chairs set up like a sacred space church for the kids to come in and have the room and the space to be kids. So that was part of the philosophy of putting it together.
And we have pictures of some of this, so we'll show that in just a second. We had a committee that, of course, to flesh this out, and lots of opinions and stuff, and kind of looked at some other services. And after like taking all that in, we were like, you know what, it doesn't have to be that complicated. We don't have to rebuild a new space. We just need to get started and think about, how do we see, how do we smell, how do we hear, what do we do for our kids who need to wiggle? What do we need to do for our kids who are neurodivergent? What do we do for our kids that can't read yet? How do they engage when so much is in a bulletin or in a prayer book? So if you'll give me just a second, I will share my screen.
And I will say, while Becky was sharing the screen, it wasn't ever static. The Church Down Under, even the physical orientation of things changed as we learned more about who was coming and what they needed. Different elements shifted around a little bit as well. But you can see when people arrive, it was the big welcome and sign in here, because when you have services that aren't in the mainstream of your sanctuary, we often would miss newcomer contact information. So it had to be very intentional, because what Church Down Under became is that entry point for a lot of new families unfamiliar with the Episcopal Church, families who just wanted to find a church that focused on kids and they could stay with their kids during the service. So welcoming and gathering information became a real vital part of that, so we could keep connected to them during the week and let them know about other things, because it was physically separated from, the big sanctuary. It was physically separated from where people usually flowed in for coffee hour. We had to create almost a church plant downstairs in the basement, so people would come in and sign. And we had Becky, I'm not quite sure what comes next on the slides. Isn't that pretty? So this is our altar, and the altar is really kind of cool because it was built by a member of Trinity, and it was also dedicated in the Native American smudge ceremony, because it was built by Native Americans. So there's a little connection there, but you can see a lot of the elements of our service in by next to the altar is a gong. And you might think that that's weird, but the gong was a way of you struck the gong to begin the service. And the beauty of that was that even a 2-year-old could bang on the gong. So it gave even little bitty people an immediate way of connecting with the start of our liturgy.
Just example of people would come down. Our service was concurrent at the same time that we had a service going on upstairs at 11 o'clock with the smells and bells and incense and all of that. This service, we would say, started at 11:05, but it was really recognizing that families would often, arrive at the 11:15 Church Down Under service. They kind of, they arrived because that's when they could get there. And so sometimes we didn't exactly start at 11:05. We would start when we had kind of enough people, some of our regulars, to kind of get going. And it also gave us an opportunity, if we had new people there, to help them get acquainted with what they were going to experience and help them get set up, because it is a hands-on interactive service. Whoever showed up, we could either ask them during the service who would like to do this or that, or if they arrived early, we could ask those children to start doing some of the things like lighting the candles and getting things ready.
before the service began, in preparation for the prayers of the people, we would ask everybody, and particularly the kids, to either write or draw a prayer, anything that was important to them, or that they were worried about, or that they loved. And the kids would take a few minutes and write a prayer. So that became, during the service, that became our prayers of the people, where the whoever was leading the service would do some rather interpretive drawing analysis on the fly, because some of the kids could only scribble, and some of the kids would write elaborate things. And we prayed for a lot of dogs. We prayed for kids to get a dog. We did a lot of prayers for family members, prayers for Jesus were always my favorite, for the color blue, whatever it was, but it put that childlike approach to prayer as an integral part of the service. And you can see behind the altar, I don't know how well you can see it, there's a blue curtain that hangs down. During the service, as we read the prayers, the kids would carry the prayers over to our curtain and they would hang on the wall. And part of the things that we were teaching them is that we carry each other and we carry each other's prayers as a community. So they got to see that actually physically.
One of the things that we did was keep simple music for about 6 weeks at a time. If there was a place in our calendar, our church calendar, that was a logical place to change music, we of course would change for that. So of course we just changed for Easter by adding Alleluias back in. But simple songs that had, maybe they were camp songs or songs that are simple hymns, some of the offertory or taizé music stuff that if you are, or has hand motions or something like that, if you're a non-reader, you can pick that up. So even if you don't come to church every week, you can pick up the hang of it. And that way, most of it wasn't a lot of complicated words and that sort of thing, but the kids get the hang of it. And we have a pianist who plays downstairs for us. And so we just are always communicating about what music we want to do, what have we had in rotation, what's something new that we've come across. And of course, I'm using the example of the garden song because the kids love that one.
So music and prayers and the gong, when we would introduce a new element, there was often a special sound that went with it. Right here, you can see these two little guys standing on the other side of our deacon there, introducing the gospel reading to the sound of the rain sticks. So two kids would be up front and they would turn over the rain sticks and you could hear that change in the moment of the liturgy. And then the gospel would be read. So easy job. A well sought after job, maybe almost as exciting as hitting the gong, but it gave more kids the opportunity to participate in the service, as well as link it to a new, different, and unique sound. We would have the gospel read. We only did one reading. Very excited. We would only do one reading and then do an interactive sermon after the reading, followed by some form of activity. So they could engage with the one main idea we presented in this little homily would be connected to maybe a craft or maybe act it out or do some other form of connecting movement. Often they would move to a different place in the room to do the craft. Oh, yeah, that was wonderful. Okay, so planting the garden or making, I think he's making, were those placemats for Iron Gate?
Placemats for Iron Gate, which was a feeding ministry that was housed here for a long time. But we can do all kinds of things. A lot of times we'll do, more recently, one of our, there's a 503c group that uses our space, but they're a separate group that work to break the cycle of incarceration in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is #1 for the most number of women incarcerated in the United States, and also the #1 for most incarcerated elderly. So that's a huge issue here. And so we can talk to children about different ways we can serve people in that call to serve people who are also in prison. And so we can write cards to them, nothing that, would put them in danger by revealing their identity, but things like the people, your friends at Trinity send you love and are thinking of you, and then they can decorate the card and we send those, or making snack packs for either those children or the kids who are at Iron Gate, again, a feeding ministry, who have food insecurity, so that they have a snack when they're not able to go to a place to get a full meal. So it was a great place to be able to do some of that service, in addition to more crafty type things or resurrection gardens and that sort of thing.
It was, I think, always a goal to help kids connect their church experience back into the world. So a lot of those outreach projects were really, I think, something that I wish adults did more of.
Kristi, you're cutting in and out for your sound. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay, hold on. Try this. Is this better?
That's better.
Okay, technology. Anyway, the whole idea of we send you forth into the world, doing that with those concrete projects helped bridge that movement from we come to church to worship God, but then we also go back into the world. So those are very concrete ways of making those connections. And this is sometimes when we had a large number of people, we would gather everybody in a circle for our prayers, and we would pass those prayers from person to person, having the kids and adults in the room say amen to each of the prayers as they went around. Again, lifting up all the prayers in community and then hanging them on the wall. So as a visual reminder of the prayers.
And we always had a blank card at the end that we always say that these are, God always knows everything that's in our hearts. We may not have the words to say that right now, or maybe we're not ready to say it out loud, but God already knows. And so we lift all that up and hang that blank card on the wall as well. Oops, there we go. There's an example of our,
yes.
yeah, always pets. And in this case, we, for everything that was blue, because we had a scribble on there. Looks like everyone loved the blue and purple marker this week, but the kids, it's one of those things that's really important to them, to be able to put up the cards. Of course, they always want to do their own prayer, but it's something that's important to them to be able to put those up.
What we do for confession, instead of a written prayer, we use confession stones, and everybody is invited to come and hold a rock representing those hard places in our own heart, places that need forgiveness. And after you hold on to that rock for a moment, you drop it into the bowl and say you are sorry. Then we use the water to symbolize the washing away of our sins. Whenever we say we are sorry, God always forgives us. So that's also a highly contested little job. People always wanted to pour the water, but you get that movement again of cleansing and of a connection to baptism and renewal when we say we are sorry. And I added these because we had great engagement with the kids all through the first part of the service, lighting candles, washing stones, prayer cards, but then you get to a Eucharistic prayer. And you know, Eucharistic prayers are not short. And even though we found some shorter, children-friendly ones, it's still a long prayer. And so instead of having, you know, the Sanctus bells up rung by an acolyte upstairs in the big church, we gave everybody who wanted one a bell. And we call these our pay attention bells, because they were taught at the appropriate places in the service. We ring the bells to call people's attention. So if they watched the person celebrate, we would ring our bell and they could pay attention and ring their bells at the same time as the celebrant. So it brought those kids back in to the prayer. And they also learned a little bit about why we have bells in church, calling everybody's attention to those important movements. So those were all, the bells get beat up after a while, but they're a very fun thing to add into the service.
And I have to say, there's also something magical. I mean, that there's a special moment that with the bells and the drawing of attention, that at the moment that we're ringing the bells, the kids are really caught up in the moment. Again, it's like there's something tangible, besides being all wiggly and all that. There's something else that's there. It's that Holy Spirit, it's that otherness that's there present, that the kids can sense, and they really tune in at that moment. It's really they will remind you if you forget the bells, or if someone hasn't passed them out yet. Or sometimes if no one has asked someone to get the bells, one of them will just go over and grab a basket and start going down the rows to pass them out.
So you know, children in fire, it's a good thing if it's contained. So we have these big pots filled with sand, and after communion, anyone can go and light a candle. Families go over and light a candle. It became something that every week everyone went over and lit a candle, and we wouldn't blow them out. The candles were able to burn down on their own as a symbol of our prayers continually going up to God in heaven. So beautiful moments, watching kids in prayer, lighting a candle for someone in their life.
Pretty good about not trying to light all of them. I mean, occasionally you get one who does more than one candle, but they're pretty good about, they light their one candle and go back and sit down. There's a picture after Easter where we flowered the cross. During COVID, when we got to a point where we were doing liturgy on the lot, which is how we were having our services outside, we didn't offer church down under. We were trying to find a way to continue to engage our kids during the service, and we didn't do music outside, but instead we took our Sanctus bells outside for our service and made that as one of the options for adapting that service at the time. How do we engage the parishioners? And we did it to make it more interactive for the kids, but it was amazing how many of our other parishioners who would never come down to this particular service loved the bells. Like, that was really a big deal for them. We had a carpet where we would do kind of our children's minute after the gospel, before the sermon, and they would invite other people to come down, and we used one of our carpets that was down in CDU, and we would have other members come and sit down with us in that space. But the bells was one of those things that people still talk about as a very adaptable thing that was kind of neat to add, because they were a part of that.
So a lot of the things that we did with that particular all-inclusive service not everybody we know can do an all-inclusive children's service, but a lot of those elements are, you can bring confession stones into a service without all the other things. You could bring bells in. So a lot of the components you can add into a family service, which is the direction that we've gone here at the cathedral, because architecture, building always wins. And I have a big formal space, but I don't have a church down under space, a separate space. So we do confession stones and invite everybody in the congregation to come up, and it's an intergenerational thing. All the kids, all the adults come up and put their stones in the bowls to be washed. And we do have a version of our Sanctus bells. It hasn't quite worked out the way I wanted to yet, but it's finding those elements that work in your space and work with your congregation, just to let the older people and the little people know that they are all included in the service, that it's their service too. It's not just grown-ups. So that's kind of what we've been working on here at the cathedral. I miss Church Down Under because it was such a change from moving from a very formal space where everything is laid out in the Book of Common Prayer to coming down to an open space where there's a lot more expression and a lot more interaction between people, between clergy and lay, between all the kids who want to be part of the service, and drawing in those quiet people who might have hidden behind a pew all of their lives. So there was so much freedom there that I really miss that space.
For Trinity, it is still a huge entry point for families to come visit our church. They will see on the website that we have this interactive service. We get a number of people who've never been to an Episcopal service before. And it's a very easy way for them to come in and experience a liturgy. Again, it has all the elements that you find in the prayer book. They just look different. And so it's a comfortable space. They don't have to stress about any of their kids being too loud or inappropriate, or feeling, like they have to keep them quiet, or even not knowing what's going to happen next and how, because it's all very fluid, and everything's printed in a bulletin, but it's very fluid and comfortable, and you can ask questions as we go along, and it makes it it's informal, but also a wonderfully reverent experience. Most of our congregation right now is new since the pandemic. Kristi and I have done this service for a long time, and so you get these waves of a group that will be down there for a long time, and they'll kind of grow up, and they will transition into what I would say is transition upstairs into a more traditional Eucharist setting. And they get it. They understand the elements. They kind of know what's coming. And so then we get a new group that comes in. Right now, our ages are pretty young. And so we scale our activities a little bit differently for that younger crew. But we get a lot who will come, they'll visit, and then they'll figure out, is this the service I need to go to, or do I need to go to upstairs? But it's a great place to enter a liturgical service if you're not familiar with that.
What I saw too is over the years, the kids who had a great foundation in Church Down Under, not every kid is going to go to Sunday school, but they got so much formation and liturgical info and growth in Church Down Under that the majority became acolytes in the formal service upstairs. They joined the children singing in the choir. They became connected to the liturgy in a different way because they got it. They got what it meant. They got the sense of, oh, I belong to this. And it's part of who I am too. So there were so many good things that came out of kids growing up in Church Down Under, including my child, my youngest, who no longer was crawling under the pews, but had an actual active role to play in the liturgy, which was a true blessing to him. And he's graduating this year from high school. So he was formed there. Becky's kids were formed there. And it makes a big difference in helping kids connect to each other and to their church.
Did you ever have adults who became more comfortable in church down under than in the service upstairs?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. In fact, we had some very loyal adults that even when they didn't have children in tow, they came to church down under. Yeah.
Our godly play teacher, or the main godly play teacher, she's I think she's around 65. She prefers church down under, so she comes to that service most Sundays. And another one of our families, they have 4 kids. They have one who's graduated, their oldest has graduated high school, and they kind of go down. The youngest is a 5th grader, and that all the teenagers will come to that service along with their parents and the youngest. Now, that's not necessarily typical because a lot of the other teens will go to the other services upstairs, but this particular family, they like this particular service, and so that's the one that they all come to.
So do y'all have any questions for us or anything that intrigued you?
Did any of you see using this? Andrew?
I just love the creativity. I love trying things from the kids' point of view. In our congregation, we use playgrounds in that are part of the sanctuary. So the kids have a dedicated space to give them some of that freedom and flexibility of expression and movement. But that's done within the context of our main worship. But we don't have a space like a down under or a separate space. And our sanctuaries lend themselves, the 2 that I serve, lend themselves to having a very natural place for families and kids. So it's a lot of it looks to me like playground, but taken to a full worship service level, which is just beautiful. So it was fun. It's fun just to look at the things you're doing and get some ideas and take some notes and bring that back to where I serve.
One of the things that's lovely about that space is that it is so flexible. For Palm Sunday, Kristi and I made a hands-on Stations of the Cross because there was this huge disconnect between Palm Sunday and a lot of our being a downtown church, and we draw. Basically, you can get to Trinity 20 to 30 minutes anywhere in the city, but for that Holy Week, sometimes that is just too much to try to get families back downtown to church and work around dinner and all those things for those other services during Holy Week. And so there was this disconnect between Palm Sunday and Easter. And so we did this hands-on Stations of the Cross, but we could do it in that space. So we could still walk around in the morning and we would have different readings and prayers for each station, and we would end with Eucharist that morning. And it was our CDU families, and it was also some of our other families who knew that that was going to be the better place for their fit that Sunday morning, which was, it's wonderful. We always have parents and grandparents who will come down to that particular service to experience, to start their Holy Week that way.
So one of the cool things about the variety of services at Trinity, we had the 9 o'clock service, the option of adults staying in church and children leaving for children's chapel. But what CDU did is allow parents and children to stay together for an entire worship service. There wasn't that I've got to go drop my kids off somewhere else and get them at communion. It was all together, intergenerational. So yeah, messy church, but I have this sense that the parents got as much out of a child-friendly sermon as the children did. So it was, you really had to hone it down to a message that was conveyable to all ears. So I think I heard a lot of comments over the years about how much people got out of just that simplification, and that we don't need to talk way up here. We can talk from our heart, and we can break it down into a single image or a single idea. I think that was very helpful for people.
I guess my question and just something, a concern kind of to be aware of, is how do you prevent it from feeling like two completely separate congregations, right? So how do you, because that's my concern, is that I'm a big proponent in the corporal worship of the body of Christ. And so how do you get those older generations to still connect with those younger generations? Because if that's missing, the continuation is less likely to happen as aging occurs.
So that's an interesting question. And I think it's a reality, though, for any church that has multiple services. My 8 o'clock service here doesn't interact with the 9 o'clock, and the 9 o'clock doesn't know most of the 11 o'clock. So there is that issue. You do get pockets, separate congregations, but we would try to we call them sacred secular events, things like Easter egg hunts and breakfast with Santa and Boo Bash, which was our trunk or treat, which brought all those different elements of the church together. So they got to know each other, maybe not on Sunday, but at fellowship events throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. Or Trinity picnic, where we celebrated our name day. We have a fall harvest dinner that brought people together. But I mean, it's a good question. We have 4 Sunday morning services. Our 7:30ers don't know our 9 o'clockers, and unless they come together for those events or classes or something else like that. I mean,
yeah, I think that's probably the big difference is just the size of our communities, because we're at one service still, and so to pull our young families out would really shake up but I mean, I see elements that can easily transfer over. We're kind of hedging, do we go playground? Do we, what do we do? So
here's an interesting thing about that. Okay, so yes, you do pull some of your young families, but there are other young families who this is too chaotic for them. So it's not like segregating all of them. We would have people who would come check out Church Down Under and go, no, and go back up to a quieter, more formal space and have their kids in nursery or go to children's chapel. But it gave people that option of, hey, I can be with my kids, we can learn together, we can worship together. And yes, it's not the same as being upstairs in church. So, but what it did is it created space for new families to come in who are totally unconnected with our church or with our liturgy. And it was like a training ground for them. So it had multiple purposes, but I do hear that when we first started it at the same time as the 11 upstairs, it was a little sad upstairs because a lot of the families are now downstairs, or they used to go to the 9:15 and now they're at the 11 downstairs. So there was some of that, that feeling of loss, but what we gained was so much more.
Yeah. I think both of you are dealing with much bigger congregations than most of us. And so I think there's a certain dynamic that's really different. I've heard of a couple of churches that have taken the idea of incorporating kids into the liturgy in somewhat a direction that you went with the bells and various things. and they would cue the kids into doing certain things at certain times, whether they were at a playground or sitting next to their parents. There was one church during Eastertide that made some little ribbon things, and every time Alleluia was said, that they were supposed to wave the ribbons. You know,
Yeah. My
so
mom's church did that. They had
Yeah.
buried the Alleluias, and then they brought them out on sticks, and everybody, every time an Alleluia, they had to raise them, and
yeah.
that's brilliant.
So, you know, that's something you could do, whether it's just kids, or you could hand them out to everybody and invite everybody to participate in something like that. Be a great thing to do on Low Sunday. Rather than trying to do it Easter Day, do it the following Sunday as something, you know.
The cool thing is about Church Down Under is you can take an element that we did at Church Down Under and just bring that into the church, you know. Having kids write their own little prayers when they come in the door and incorporate them into your prayers of the people is easy. It takes a little training of the people who do the prayers of the people. Don't forget the kids' prayers, but anything like that, it takes those little hands and puts them in the worship service. Here it's a little bit different because our 9 o'clock family service is led by our cherubs and choristers, our youth kids, our young kids. We have like 25 kids in a choir. So it has the feel of more of a formal service, but we added in things like bells and stones for the other kids who aren't in the choir. So each church, we're all organically different, but whatever we can do to make the church seem like they care about kids in liturgy, it goes a long way.
Well, and I think too, my background, I'm actually an early childhood educator, a volunteer Christian ed chair right now, actually. But we talk constantly to our aides about the difference between entertainment and engagement. And so you're moving from entertainment where you're providing a worship bulletin, a children's worship bulletin that has puzzles that can keep them busy, to actually engaging them, which taps into an entirely different part of your being. So I try and hold on to that when we're working with stuff like that. Is okay, is this for entertainment purpose or is this for engagement purpose?
That's a great distinction.
Absolutely. And thinking about what is something other than coloring. I have a kid who, my oldest is my tricky kid. He's got some neurodivergent stuff. And so ADD, he also has dysgraphia, would get overwhelmed by certain smells or things like that. And so if you gave him crayons and a piece of paper, that was not doing anything. And so there's a lot of times where the first thing we go to is, oh, we'll get him to draw that, or we'll get him to color that. And it's like, well, we can't have everything around that mode. We have to think about our kids who struggle with the fine motor stuff and how do we keep them engaged in those types of things. For the summer CDU, we're going to experiment, I guess. We're going to do our services outside and hopefully not die from being too hot, but as it can get pretty hot in Oklahoma during the summer, but we're going to do that. And the nice thing about having the elements that we have is that our service will still feel like it does inside when we take it outside, because we still have a lot of those things that transcend that. But I was thinking about, if your church has some kind of outside service and you want that to like create that atmosphere or environment of reverence and being in tune, that might be a great way to incorporate some of these things instead of going from this darkness of being inside. to outside and not having something to draw those kids in who can easily be distracted by the wind blowing through the trees or the bag blowing around in the, whatever it is. Yeah. Picking daisies, whatever it is. Yeah, for sure. Might be a great way to keep them engaged during that outside time.
We have a running joke in our family because we've got neurodivergence all over, which was we were driving along one day and one of my daughter's friends looked out the window and says, "Oh, look at the shiny wires." And this was a high school student. So, look at the shiny wires. You never know what's going to pique their interest. Other comments, thoughts, ideas this has struck with you? Struggling, trying to figure out how you put this into your context?
I've been enjoying hearing some of the concrete techniques that you used for various aspects of the liturgy. And one of the things I do is help lead a family camp at the Barbara C. Harris Camp and Conference Center. And we have midday worship, which is like the focal point of our camp. And many aspects of that service are altered to be for family participation. But I'm always looking for more things. And I love the confession stones and the prayer cards, and I can see those being really valuable in our setting. So I really appreciated hearing that. And I think Karen's question about, where do families go and different identities of congregations or, many flocks within a large congregation is such a good question. You'll probably encounter that in many different settings. It sounds like you guys used your space and your resources really well in a really neat way. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you. I will say that it was and still is a very labor-intensive effort, because when you are planning out for a season, you want to match up the different readings with a theme, with a craft or an activity. That can be it can be hard work. It can be very heavy work going, oh my gosh, I used to be so happy when we got to Advent because we could do Jesse trees, emphasizing the different symbols each year and coming up with different ways of making the little ornaments so the kids could come and bring them up to the church, to the tree. And we learned that we didn't have to do something different for children's chapel at 9. So the project and the idea was brought over into our children's chapel, which wasn't a full Eucharist service. It was kids coming out during the liturgy of the word. But there was that resonance that the formation part was happening for kids both at the 9 and at the church and under at 11. So trying to find all these different ways. I don't know about y'all, but getting families to commit to traditional Sunday school, it's rough. We can't get the same percentage of families commit to Sunday school. I can't seem to do it here. I don't think we could do it on a consistent way at Trinity. So it's that formation piece, which was so exciting to be able to give to those kids on Sunday mornings on a consistent basis.
So my context is very, very different. For the last 6 months, I've been the pastor of family connections at a house church network. So we're just a bunch of small congregations meeting in homes. So very different. It's definitely not high church, but we have a rhythm to what we do and we follow the church calendar. But as I was listening, I thought, oh, it's a bummer we can't recreate, what you're doing, but I can see, like the prayers of the people, that element, how easily as families are having their dinner when they come in, fill out these cards and we'll have the pastor read through it. Like there was just lots of different elements I could see working. And I think the biggest takeaway for me was that every very small space of time, there was a thing that the kids could physically do to participate. Because like ideally we all like at our church believe in intergenerational worship, but like the reality of it is it's been mayhem. Like when I came in, it's just chaos, like really crazy, all of us in one little space. So I think things like the bells, saying like, okay, when we switch from, the music time to, reading of the word or whatever, that was the biggest one for me, is just figure out how to involve them every 5 to 10 minutes. And I think we would hold their attention better and not have to entertain then, to just engage. So thank you. And any other advice is so welcome.
I was thinking about what is it Lyndon said about the camp aspect, and I was a camp counselor, and a lot of my formation came out of camp experience and in the Episcopal Diocese of Oklahoma, and just the flexibility of our Eucharist when we boil down those elements to what they really are. And then thinking about, you're talking about being in this house church, you might not have a place for a big bowl to put candles or something, but maybe you have a bowl that has a candle in the center where other people can put rocks around, and that's their prayer that they say after, having communion, or something that it kind of builds that way. Just that you're talking about the small acts, and I really think that's what it is. How do we use our different senses? A lot of kids are kinetic learners, and so they have to engage by doing something physical. I know I am certainly more engaged when I do that. And the little activities that we do, when we were doing liturgy on the lot, we would do that activity instead of in the middle of the service, we would do that at the end. And so we could say, after the service, you can go to this place or whatever, and we're going to have a thing that kind of develops what we talked about a little bit more. And maybe it's making a labyrinth in air dry clay, a finger labyrinth in air dry clay, or maybe it's making a bracelet that has a bead that represents, the color represents a line in the Lord's Prayer. And so they have something tangible that they can, a manipulative that they can use while they say the prayer. So there's all kinds of ways of continuing that in small ways, that if it doesn't work with the rhythm of your service, you can find a time after that to incorporate those things.
I think one thing to remember, at least in my experience, is that we talk about kids being kinetic learners. There are adults who are kinetic learners too. And there are adults who need that kind of nonverbal learning, to know those things and to remember to incorporate them in as well, so that we don't lose ourselves in our words. One of the things I talk to adults all the time is they talk about how the kids wiggle. And my question to them is always, are you 100% focused on the service all the time? And they'll look sheepish and, no, not really. I said, yeah, you're making your grocery list. And so you're doing in your head what the kids are doing with their bodies. And that doesn't mean you aren't engaged. It just means that you're in and out. And kids are the same way. They're in and out. They do it physically, you do it mentally. And I think that's helped a lot of adults in our congregation to recognize what's actually happening, and to help them engage with the kids to some degree. Not only their own kids, but the kids who are around them, and help them refocus on what's going on, or giving them a cue. I have some kids I sit with frequently at church, and one of the things I'll do is say, this song is going to have a lot of hallelujahs. Don't, tap my knee when you hear the hallelujah, or whatever. Brennan's 5, and that's what he can do because he can't read the hallelujah yet. And his sister, who is turning 4, found a little book that had, I think, a Jesus Loves You song and then some prayers on some other pages. And she will turn to either the music or the words, depending on what's going on, because she wants to participate. She can't read it, she can't sing it, but she's participating by, when we stand up and sing a hymn, she opens the music and looks at it. And that's her thing. We need to engage with everyone who's around us, and to be aware of those people who are new or haven't done this before or haven't ever done it before. It's the more you can think of ways to engage the kids, you can also engage the adults, I guess.
Absolutely. When I came here, we didn't have very many of those connecting points for adults. And one of the things we had started at Trinity was, around All Saints Day, an altar of remembrance. So even during COVID, people sent in photos and names, and we created an altar of remembrance. But the first year I did that here, I had so many people bring in names and photos that fell off the altar. They just never had that connecting, because we forget that we want to have people bring their whole selves into worship, which is why, all of our senses are engaged, but we bring all of ourselves, all the things that we've been carrying during the week, we bring it to church. And how do we lay those things on the altar? I think for me, one of the moments in COVID that meant a lot to me was we would do the virtual service, no one in the building, and then people could come through our drive-through communion to receive communion. And we'd get, 80, 90 people coming through the car line, but that became a more living altar rail than anything I've ever experienced, because not only would people receive communion, but we offered prayers, we gave treats to their pets, they brought us coffee, they brought their tithes, they brought things for the thrift shop, they brought things for the food pantry. So it became that giving and receiving of more than what we usually do at church. It became a living altar rail. And with the church done under that ability for those kids to bring their whole selves, it makes it a living altar rail. And so how can we do that for any service where people come with all their burdens, with all their thanks, with all their joy? And how do we receive it in our liturgy? And how do we give back that gift of sacrament, that gift of God's presence, God's love back to them in a living way? I think for kids or for adults, that's the goal. Any ways you can intergenerationally connect your families into the liturgy. So it's not just, oh, we always do this. Well, let's do something a little bit different this week, or let's add something a little different so people can have that outlet for themselves.
And different doesn't have to be every week. It
Oh, no.
it can
Mhm.
be occasional. You know, there is value to stability.
Oh, definitely value to stability, especially in a very unstable world. Yes.
Yes, yeah. One parish I was in had a 5 p.m. service on Saturday night. And I laminated the prayers of the people, each prayer onto a big poster board. And we had sticky notes, Post-it notes, and everybody would come in and write whatever their prayer was and put it on the particular prayer.
I love
And
that.
we'd gather them up and use them as part of our prayers of the people. That's certainly, you could do something like that, Kristi. That would be really cool. And the kids can draw, the kids can write, but the adults can do it too. And incorporate that would be really, I could see that working really well. I went to a house church for a while too when I was in college, so I'm well aware how that works. So, other people, thoughts, ideas, things you've done in the past? You were talking, Karen, about ways to bring people together. During COVID, we bought a little stainless steel fire pit and we made s'mores. And we've done that a couple of times, and a couple of times since we've come back. And people absolutely love it, especially in New England where it's cold. And we've done it like in the late fall or the early spring. And it gets us outside and together. And we have coffee and cider, and the kids roast marshmallows, and they hang around out and talk and run around, and we hang around and talk to one another, and people have a grand time. If it's a great way to bring a lot of different people together. So.
I like that visual of the s'mores and coming together. It reminds me of I think it's in Searching for Sunday, Rachel Held Evans' book, where she talks about the different ways we have communion, and she talks about if someone has died and someone comes in with a stack of Tupperware that's food, and she's like, that's communion. And so all the ways that we can incorporate, some of these elements with that idea of breaking bread together, whether it's having s'mores or showing up for the person who's had a baby who needs food or whatever it is, but those different ways that you were just talking about of sneaking some of this other stuff in, I think engages that and makes it that much more powerful.
Yeah. Anne, do you have anything to add? Anne lives up the road from me.
I really appreciate all the ideas. I'm thinking about how we can incorporate them, because one of the things you have in big churches is a lot of staff. And so I love the ideas that we can incorporate into the regular service rather than trying to have a separate service, because that's not really possible for us right now. So,
Totally legitimate. We would often be like, oh my gosh, why the heck are we doing 4 services on Sunday morning? Because yes, even with a larger staff, it's a stretch. It was a big stretch.
Yeah.
So Ann and I go to the same church, and one of the other things that we do is we have 4 family services throughout the year, and those services are, there's the family services, and then there's also like the pageant service. So there's kind of 5 services throughout the year that are very accessible for kids, and the family services are capital F, capital S, and they're meant to be explicitly accessible for kids of all ages. But that has been a nice way for me as a parent, bringing kids to church who are not still and silent children who sit, to know that, yeah, like coming up this Sunday has been a challenging one to be sitting in the pews, but like next week is a family service. And then I don't have to be quite so stressed about how much my kids are running around, because I know that there'll be a little bit more stuff that's at their head level. And we are, like Ann said, we're not a cathedral, we're smaller. And so this has been a good way that we've been experimenting with adding, explicit family content aimed at families. And mostly it's been really well received, I think. I was part of a really interesting group that re-examined the prayers that we used in the family service, because we had a new music director come on board, and also another person who were just concerned, a member of our 8 o'clock, you are typically 8 o'clock, and they were very concerned that the family services are at 9 o'clock, right, Ann? Right? There's no 8 o'clock
10
on.
o'clock.
Okay, sorry, so it is 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
But so these individuals were very concerned that the prayers being used at the 10 o'clock family services were dumbing down the beautiful language that the Book of Common Prayer has given us. And so we sat down and we met with them, and we took them through all of the prayers, and it was amazing, because each time we went through a section at the end, they were like, oh, well, that's nice. I like that. No, that's great. That's really elegant. That's a really good phrasing. And so we took them through the whole service, and they were like, okay, no notes. But we had to do that to get them on board. That's the very slow work of relationship building and trust building that it takes to get to people to move out of what their comfort zone is and where they have found God into something new. And I think, sitting down with them was helpful for them.
Did you find that when you have the family service, you still have the same other people who don't have younger children or don't have, school age children or whatever attending those services, or do they like go to a different service?
They leave.
Yes.
Well, one of those individuals in the meeting was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to come to family services. And I'm concerned. He was the person who wanted to look at the language. And I would say since then, I have not noticed him avoiding the family services. And Ann's not.
I think a lot of the people have really appreciated it, as you were saying about the sermons, Christina, that when you, it's not that you dumb it down, you reduce it to the essence, and then people really get it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the other thing that as I was listening to you, because I do children's formation, and we have the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. So a lot of the things that you talk about, we do with the children apart from the service, and then go up for the Eucharist.
Yeah, I was thinking of a couple of things. We did lose a couple whose children had grown, and when I made innovations to the 9 o'clock service, it was too child friendly and they left. So there will be movement in and out because we can't please everybody. And they could have come to the very formal service at 11, but they felt that their church time was 9. And what do you, I'm like, okay, but I'm not going to take away from a whole entire population of people at the church because one family feels that it's too child friendly. So I know there's a lot of politics involved in any sort of change in the church. And there are risks, and there's a cost.
There's the old joke about, I need to change that light bulb. Change? My grandmother put that light bulb there.
It's such a nice light bulb.
It's worked for decades. If you haven't run across this book, it's an older book. It's Roman Catholic. I don't know if I can. It's called A Walk Through Our Church. And it's done by the woman I mentioned before, Gretchen Mueller-Nelson. But she goes through every part. You're not going to be able to see it, but she goes through every part of the church, and with lovely pictures. It's for a slightly older crowd because the text is longer. But she just does a wonderful job with it. And I thought I had it sitting here for something else today. So I wanted to, if you hadn't run across it, I thought you might enjoy it and have a way of incorporating it in all you're doing. So, Kate, you just caught the end of this. Did you have questions? Did you want to jump in and ask us about something?
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I was late.
That's okay.
Yeah, and I did it. My friend Leanna invited me to this. She's our children's director at our church, and she's the one who knew about this, so she knows more about this group. I just am really enjoying your conversation. It sounds like a lot of the things Leanna and I have been talking about with our church, trying to find way. Like, I think one of the issues we've seen is that we have a great kids program, but then transitioning to becoming a part of the church body, it's been difficult because we keep our service separate. We don't have any integration right now, and Leanna has been working hard to bring our pastoral staff on board with incorporating kids into church more, and it's been difficult. So she can speak more to that. But anyway, I'm so happy to have found this group, and I love hearing what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, it did get recorded, so you can go back and listen to the beginning of it.
Thank you. That's great.
Leanna, did you want to jump in and say something?
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I was late too.
No,
Me and you, Kate. But yeah, like Kate said, we feel that there's a big opportunity that we're missing out on by the separation, and we're thinking of ways to kind of dip our toes in or start making more connections intergenerationally, but it does feel like it's a big task. And I think both Kate and I are just kind of searching for people who are doing it well and searching for language that boosts what we feel in our hearts is worth pursuing. So yeah, I think we're, like Kate said, we're just both happy to have found this.
What denomination are you? Where are you, and how big is your church?
Yeah, we are in Iowa, in Iowa City. We are non-denominational, used to be part of the Vineyard movement,
Okay.
but left that to be fully open and affirming of LGBTQ. And gosh, post-COVID, our congregation is probably around 300 to 400, but it's also so much more variable post-COVID. It seems like from week to week, it's just bigger jumps in numbers than it used to be. And you've probably noticed too, like regular attenders now tend to be folks who come once or twice a month, whereas regular attenders used to be like 3 or 4 times a month. So it's just different. And we've got a pretty big percentage of kids. We have a lot of families with young kids, probably somewhere around 25% usually.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
A lot of Episcopal churches are struggling to have 2 kids. And I think what happened at Trinity, when I started, at Trinity, 17 years ago, the main demographic was over 40, but with intentional emphasis on kids, when I left a few years back, the main demographic was under 40. So you can change the demographics of the church, but it has to be intentional. And what we discovered too is once it became known that Trinity was a place where kids and families were welcome, they wouldn't necessarily come to Church Down Under, but they would come to Trinity because they know we cared about kids.
Yeah.
So whatever you can do to create that sense in your community that, hey, you might not have a totally interactive family service, but you love kids and they are an important part of your ministry. It changes who comes.
Yeah. Leanna, I stuck my email in there partially because I come from an evangelical background, and so I know wherever you speak. And I've been doing faith formation for about 30 years. So between those two, if you want to get a hold of me, please do.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. It's been interesting in my little parish, which is quite small compared to the ones we've been talking about. We've had an influx of families with kids. And we also recently put out a pride flag and some pride stickers, and we're starting to, that's also a demographic that's starting to become larger. We're the only church in town who's really accepting of that queer demographic. So it's getting interesting as things are shifting. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much. And it will be on the Province One YouTube channel. I will put that information up on all of the Facebook pages where I put it initially, so you can find that, and that should work well. And thank you very much, Becky and Christina.
Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you for the
been so
rest
much
of you
fun.
for showing up. So
Yeah, thank
there
you
is
very
one
much.
next month. We're talking about confirmation. if you're interested. So, it's the same place to sign up on Eventbrite. So, thank you.